for our presentation today, we have Meg Schnabel, and we also have another Meg Lowe, who I'll be inviting up to the podium to talk a little bit more in depth about human trafficking. If I may invite both of the Megs up for our presentation today. Thank you.
My name is Meg Schnabel, and I'm the Executive Director of Cornerstone. We're one of the local nonprofits among a number of them that are doing some work addressing human trafficking across our community. You know, I wanted to, as I was sitting here thinking of, before I wanted to introduce Meg, I thought about Pete last week. This is the first presentation of the series for Terry's new year, and Pete stood up and said, we have some great ones, we have some kind of okay ones, and some that will be wanting. And so I'm really worried about us today. I'm hoping we're one of those great ones, that we set the bar really high. But that was tough to begin after he shared that. Also, I just want to acknowledge, we have other experts in the room too. Chief Potts, obviously on the ground level, when you're talking about trafficking issues, we have somebody here that deals with that. So as we talk about some of these issues today, I recognize that there's others in the room that have different parts to play, and we know that everybody actually has a part today to play as we begin to address human trafficking. And for Rotary to take this on, Karen Wachowski, did I pronounce that right? Karen Wachowski, I went to I had an opportunity to meet her before she presented at the conference this past year. Wasn't sure who she was, and she came in just like gangbusters. I mean, just smart as all get out, from someone just kind of in the lay community, working to understand the really complex issues around trafficking. She was just on it. I mean, just knew this stuff and has been pushing to see Rotary integrate this work in a way that was just inspiring. And then when I went and heard her presentation, I walked in thinking, she's not a direct service provider, maybe she was just on it and did such a tremendous job. So I knew when we were gonna bring it here today, I reached out actually to Karen and asked if she had the ability to come in, and she did say, I can't, she would have loved to, and she said, Meg Lowe has been amazing as well and has been doing these presentations to Rotary clubs across the area. So I was thrilled to have either one of them come, because I think they integrate both educational knowledge about the real hard facts, as well as how Rotary might position itself and some of the things that are going on. And then, Terry called on Friday. Terry, I forgot to say this, he also added pressure. He calls and he says, I don't know, Meg, I just wanted to let you know that this is my year and these really need to be top notch. And, not only do we want you to just speak to us, we want this engaging, we want this participatory, we don't want the old stuff. This is a new reign, a new era. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to go home and work all weekend now. No, we didn't do that. We thought it would be engaging. So actually these first two slides are new slides that we've added because we wanted them this engaging. We're gonna ask you a question. So, what images, Terry, come to mind when you first hear these words? Teen prostitute. Has anyone heard the word teen prostitute? What does it conjure up for you when you hear that terminology?
Homelessness.
Homelessness?
Exploitation.
Exploitation?
Pain.
Pain? Young?
Drugs.
Drugs.
Non-stable family.
Okay. Well, here, this is a little exercise to think about how we use terminology. So, actually, this is a smart group. We have to remember this too. So, there's two terminologies that get put out there: teen prostitute and commercial sexual exploitation of children. Commercial exploitation of children gives a very different message. It's sort of what I'm trying to hold it. So when we talk about teen prostitute, often resistant, easy, drug abuse, making money, out to make money. It's a choice. Kids who are in the system, slut. I mean, silhouettos, mini skirts, fishnets, you're picturing that type of image. When we talk about children who are exploited, because that is what they are, we're talking about youth who need help, a victim. someone who is incredibly vulnerable, abused, neglected, perhaps a family history of destabilization, which is what you talked about. They're trapped. So as we just talk about the presentation today, I really want you to be thinking about how we think about this issue. And I'm also going to hand out in just a little bit, after you're sort of further into the presentation, some ads that are put out on back pages. And I don't know how many of you have seen those before. When we talk about youth, you find youth on back pages regularly. And when you have a sense of how it's described and how this challenge is so deep in our own community, that'll move you to want to also become more involved. So with that, I think I'll let Terry go ahead and begin. And Meg, I'm sorry. Terry, you're on my mind. So Meg, thanks. That's the same last name.
Thank you, Meg. Can you hear me? Everybody hear me? That's good. Yeah, thanks for the pressure, Terry. And Meg. Whoa. My name is Meg Lowe, and I'm a member of the Lake Minnetonka Excelsior Rotary Club. I'm not tall enough to see over this. Maybe I can stand over here. I'm just here to give you an overview of human trafficking. Some of you in the room probably know more than I do. I'm not here as an expert. I'm here as a Rotarian. I'm a relatively new Rotarian. I joined our club about a year ago. But and partly because I heard about this issue and this initiative, and I'm passionate about it, horrified by it, and I was ready to roll up my sleeves and get busy. So we're all still learning, but anyway, I'll want to give you an overview of the issue and what Rotary is doing about it. So I think it often helps to start with a definition. Human trafficking is defined as the exploitation of a person through force, fraud, or coercion for commercial sex or forced labor. Now, you've probably seen stories on the news where they've intercepted a semi-trailer full of trafficked victims, rescued, who've been brought into the country and held captive as sex slaves. And that does happen, and we see those stories on the news. But human trafficking does not have to involve transportation at all. And it doesn't have to be that the victims are locked into a semi-trailer or chained in a storage facility. It's much broader than that, and that's why one of the reasons why it's so hard to end it. Human trafficking is also referred to as human slavery, and that's the term that Rotary International uses. Rotary International has adopted human slavery as one of the next big global initiatives for us to address worldwide, now that we've nearly eradicated polio. Globally, there are up to 42 million slaves. The reason that there's such a broad range here in the estimates is it's really hard to get concrete statistics because this is a crime where the victims really are in the shadows. So most of the numbers that I give you today are culled from a number of qualified resources, but we almost always have a range. Still, even with this range, there's more slaves than there were in the world when slavery was legal. And it's growing. Globally, about a quarter of the victims of human trafficking are victims of sex trafficking. Here in the US, those percentages are reversed. So about 3/4 of the human trafficking victims are exploited for sex. And mostly it's girls and women who are exploited, but males and mostly young boys are also exploited. And estimates are that 1/3 of the victims are children. It's a big problem. $150 billion a year industry, if you will. Now, I don't know really what $150 billion looks like or what that is. I know that it's a big number, but for reference, that's more than the profits from Amazon, Apple, Disney, Exxon, Facebook, Google, McDonald's, and Microsoft combined. So it's a big, big profitable industry. It's the second largest and fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. Recently just surpassed illegal arms dealing. It's not the kind of victory that we want to have. And in the US, the estimated annual profit for a trafficker for putting one woman into service as a sex slave is about $100,000. That's for one. And typically they have dozens or even hundreds. The annual profits for a child is more than double that. All right, so what about in Minnesota? It doesn't happen here, right? Unfortunately, Minnesota has the 13th largest incidence of human trafficking in the country. Why? Why is that? Well, I'm really not sure, but we do have Duluth is a major port. We are a border state. Easy access to major interstates. We also have the Mall of America, lots of malls, transportation hubs, and a lot of recruitment happens there. But it's important to remember, again, that it doesn't have to involve transporting people across borders. And much recruitment happens online. In fact, a recent study found that over 34,000 sex ads were posted online in the Twin Cities alone. 34,000. That's a lot. Yeah, Meg is going to send around some screenshots of images of some of these postings. In Minnesota, Minneapolis is a hub. We are one of the primary hubs for trafficking in the state. But it's not just a big city issue. It happens everywhere. It happens in Bloomington, happens in Minnetonka, where I'm from, it happens in the countryside. It happens all across the state. And there was a recent sting not too long ago that led to the arrest of 48 individuals in the trafficking industry. And the victims were all high school students and middle school students, I believe at Minnetonka High School. And this all happened in a big house on Lake Minnetonka. So it happens everywhere. Anybody can be a victim of human trafficking, but some populations are more vulnerable. They come from all backgrounds. Traffickers prey on the desperation of people in poverty, often promising them false promises of jobs. Children and youth in foster care and group homes have the highest rate of child sex trafficking in the country. Runaways and homeless youth are particularly at high risk. One recent study showed that nearly half of the youth who were engaged in commercial sex activity said they did it because they didn't have a place to stay. But some trafficked youth continue to live at home and go to school every day. There's a strong correlation between childhood sexual abuse or neglect in unstable home environments and sex trafficking. But also, young teenage girls might be at risk of being recruited simply by virtue of their developmental maturation process. 11, 12, 13-year-old girls, they want to take risks, feel a need for independence, feel misunderstood. Maybe they're seeking romantic relationships. Maybe they have low self-esteem. They have an excruciating need for acceptance. Those are all normal things, but it makes young teens very susceptible to the recruitment tactics of traffickers and pimps. The most striking and disturbing statistic on this page is the last one. Whoops, I missed a page. The first one. The average age of children being trafficked, 12 to 14. I've seen some recent studies internationally, the average age is 11. But this is an average. So that means that many, many children are being recruited much younger than 12 or 11. So I don't know about you, but if you have children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews who are 11 or 12 or 13, you're probably about as horrified as I am about this. How are people recruited? Well, it happens in schools, in malls, bus stops, social hangouts, parties. A lot of it happens online. Here are just some stories. I don't know if you can read that back there. Some sort of testimonials from teens who have been trafficked. Online, this is how it happens. Traffickers pose as young men. They strike up an online relationship with young girls, and then they convince them to meet. They act as their boyfriend. They buy them stuff, sometimes drugs. Eventually, they'll claim, oh, if you just do this one time, we need it for money, or we need some money. It's easy, I'll be in the next room. And then that's how it starts. And then they're stuck. Some traffickers even hire high school kids to recruit other students. And Hopkins recently, I believe this led to an arrest, but there was a high school student who was being trafficked I think she was 16. She recruited another student who was younger than she was to be trafficked as well. She got paid for that. Both girls were cheerleaders. Again, often people are recruited just because they need a place to stay. Teens in the LGBTQ community are also at high risk just because of all the struggles that they're having fitting in. Sometimes they're rejected by friends or family. So this is a survival sex for them. Well, the buyers are mostly middle-aged men married with children. Typically, they don't purchase sex in their hometowns. So it frequently happens on business trips, fishing or hunting trips, bachelor parties. Nearly 75% of the buyers purchase sex for the first time before the age of 21. Now, that's really disturbing, but I think it also presents an opportunity for us. This means we need to reach boys and young men during those early formative years to let them know what the impact is of these actions on these young girls and women, and to understand that they can't dehumanize and objectify women that way. So if we can reach them early, then we may have a chance, because the data show that they're much less likely to start buying sex if they haven't already by the time they're 21. So what's being done about it? In Minnesota, a lot of organizations and agencies are working hard, as Meg mentioned. Our law enforcement community working so hard, arresting perpetrators, rescuing victims, training industries, hospitality and transportation industries on what to do, how to spot it, what to do if they suspect something. Agencies and nonprofits are providing victim support and rehabilitation, like counseling, short-term housing, job training, healthcare, to help victims or survivors start a new life. A lot of that work was heightened over the last few years in preparation for hosting the Super Bowl. I'm sure you've all heard about that on the news too, but it was amazing, the concerted effort that went in to protecting our young people against sex trafficking, where we might have an uptick of it in the Twin Cities because of the Super Bowl. It's just incredible. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people working on this. The benefit, in addition to not having very many incidences of it, but it also raised awareness throughout the state. I've seen posters everywhere, all over the airport now. And this is largely due to those coordinated efforts of many people. Also, Minnesota is one of 14 states and one of the first to adopt safe harbor laws. Safe harbor law recognizes that children under 18 are victims, not criminals. And the law also provides funding and resources for victims and survivors to help them get back on their feet so they'll be less susceptible to fall into that again. Why is this happening? Well, it's a highly profitable, market-driven industry. Frankly, if there were no buyers, we wouldn't have any traffickers, we wouldn't have any victims. And as a society, we just haven't done enough to stop it yet. So how do we end it? Lots of different ways that will go into that if we're going to be successful. We have to reduce those vulnerabilities of our young people, reduce those risk factors. And this is all part of prevention. We have to work with for education, we need to work with our schools to educate children about the issues so they learn to be wary. So that the 13-year-old, when she's chatting online with somebody who tells her she looks sexy and wants to meet him at the mall, maybe she'll recognize that for what it is, and she'll stay away. And then she'll talk to an adult about it. We need to train teachers and parents to recognize the behavior of kids who might be victims of sex trafficking. How can they recognize them in the schools, and what can they do to help them, help support them? But it's not just a school issue. The whole community needs to be aware of this, and that's why we're really going to be working hard to raise awareness. It's everybody's problem. And we have to stop the demand. We have to help men understand the impact of trafficking victims, help them realize that while the call girls may look like they're 25, they may only be 13. We need to teach young men and boys not to dehumanize and objectify girls. We need to stand up against it. So that means, guys at the hunting camp or the fishing camp, and somebody says, hey, let's go into town to the strip club. It means just say no. And that's how it starts. Okay, so why is Rotary involved? Well, Rotary is the largest global service organization in the world. And human trafficking is the fastest growing and most widespread and horrific humanitarian issue in our world today. I don't know about you, but those two things combined seem to me to be a mandate for action. So yeah, Rotary is involved. Rotary International, and now all 3 districts in the state of Minnesota are committed to this initiative for the next several years. Okay, so what can we do? Our initiative is working with the Minnesota Department of Health, with Human Services, legislators, with a number of agencies, coalitions, and organizations who are working hard to address this. Well, we have over 5,000 Rotarians across the state, all committed to service above self. So yeah, we can be ambassadors for change. Our focus in this initiative will be on awareness, education, and prevention. So how can your club get involved? Well, first we're asking each club to identify a club champion. And that's really a member of your club who's willing to be an advocate for this issue, kind of a committee chair, if you will, for the next few years. And you're lucky, because you've got Meg Schnabel. Club champion extraordinaire. So we'll have lots of different opportunities for club champions to get together, we'll do some trainings to learn of the different kinds of efforts that are available in your local community that you might want to partner with. We'll give you toolkits for how to engage your club and your community, so we can get people, your whole community involved. We want to build awareness. You can invite speakers to your club. If you want to invite other experts to your club, that's a great idea. If you were part of another organization in your community, schools or churches, civic groups, a book club, and you want them to be aware of this issue, we have speakers that will be happy to come to any group or organization to talk about this issue. And then to initiate a club project. You might want to partner with a local organization, maybe even partner with a nearby club so you can leverage your resources. I know your Bloomington Club has worked for years with Cornerstone, and that's fantastic. You may decide you want to do even more. Work with another organization or get the community involved somehow. One way is to use the power of social media. Do you have a Facebook page in your club? Use that. Post articles, share them, invite your friends to join the cause. Some examples of clubs in the area who are already engaged in projects. The Eden Prairie Club is working with an organization called Superhero Kids and Not Me, and that group provides assault prevention training to schools. So the Eden Prairie Club talked to their superintendent, brought in this group and say, we need this in our schools. And after a couple of meetings, the district leadership agreed. And so now they're bringing this curriculum in as young as first grade. And they're also training some parents in the district to help be teaching assistants or training assistants on this. Lake Minnetonka Excelsior Club, my club, we're partnering with Act United. It's a local organization that works with at-risk youth. Obviously, Bloomington is working with Cornerstone. Minneapolis Club number 9 has also started working with some local family partnership. That's right. So there's lots of different ways to do it, just by sponsoring speakers, host an event to raise awareness, maybe posting posters in public places. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but when I was flying through Atlanta once, I saw in the restrooms at the airport, there were posters on the inside door of the stalls about human trafficking. Are you a victim? We're here to help. Call this number. If you can't use your phone, if you don't want anybody to hear you, text here with the number. It's a state law in Atlanta, or in Georgia, I found out. Every public restroom has to have this notice posted. Well, we should do that here. You know, let's talk to our legislators or community people and try and get that word out more. Again, to not only raise awareness, but to help victims. Start an Interact Club. Do you guys have an Interact Club? The high school? Start one. This is high school students, kind of would-be Rotarians. But it's a perfect way to get kids involved. We've learned this a lot in recent months, how effective students can be and raising awareness, being active about an issue they're passionate about. There's a student at Hopkins High School who's actively lobbying the legislature to adopt a statewide curriculum. This girl's on fire. She's started her own nonprofit. She's 16. There's student athletes at Breck who created a video. Maybe you've seen it. It kind of went viral online. It was a video for their campaign, Girls Are Not for Sale. It's an amazing job, and a lot of people heard about it, and now other schools are trying to do the same thing. So Interact would be a great way to, again, raise awareness in your community. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Meg, talk a little bit more about Cornerstone and what's going on in your community here.
Well, really just a little bit about Cornerstone, because I think all of you know the work that's going on in our agency. And actually Maggie was here when we received a check for, I don't know, it was $1,500, which was tremendously helpful for dignity bags, basic support items when we're working with young kids. And we, you know, one thing I wanted to, a couple of things, it's going to be a little disjointed in terms of comments, but when we think about trafficked youth, we often think about that kid that, you know, who's been hired, there's a pimp, there's a, you know, the whole way up the line. And I also want us to think about a little bit more broadly sexually exploited youth. There are so many young kids that are vulnerable, as we talked about, based upon their histories, their backgrounds, with their identities, what's going on in their lives, that just makes them sort of exploitable for sex. Not somebody who's part of a big network, not being transported around the country, but is being exploited by an adult who should be loving them, or an adult who should be caring for them, and is doing just the opposite. So I think we need to broaden sort of how we look at this a little bit, and Cornerstone works a lot with sexually exploited youth. Some have been trafficked. We've worked with adults who are trafficked, but we also work with kids. And there are a lot of really good programs across this community that work with kids. The Link is one of the navigators, and one of the places that many folks refer individuals to. Avenues for Youth right here in Bloomington too. It's been doing amazing work at the Mall of America. You find kids who've been trafficked or exploited. They have staff on site at the mall. I want to just mention them. Oasis for Youth, Family Partnership is the Minneapolis program that has been doing a really lot of work, particularly with buyers, you know. And I want us to think about that, and that's my segue over into just thinking about ourselves and why Rotary. I mean, Rotary was a men's organization, and certainly we know that its history has shifted, and it's so wonderful that we're integrated many people of backgrounds and genders as a part of our group. But if it has a history of men's organization, men have capability to do so very much. One of the things that Cornerstone is going to be doing this year is we've started what is called a men's council. We want a men's council to be a part of just thinking about how do men really make an impact. I used to go out and do educational presentations, and we'd ask people, do they know anyone who's been a victim of abuse or violence, and ask them to raise their hands. And you'd see how many. I mean, I can't hardly go through a week, not my job, without someone disclosing that they've been or experienced violence and abuse. My hairdresser, you know, so many folks around us, we know they claim that. But I want to ask men, how many in your lifetime do you know other men who have used pornography, might have bought sex, might have attended a strip club, might have joked about these sorts of things? How do we bring men a part of this work? Because that voice is so important to ending it. And I also want to say, it's not just girls who are exploited. We know young boys are exploited too. But overwhelmingly, it is men that are the buyers. And this piece of research that came out of the University of Minnesota, looking at Minnesota, when you think the average middle-aged man married with kids, these are people around us every day. It's not somebody wearing pink hair walking down the street. So if it's men among us every day, we have an opportunity to make a difference just by using our voice and talking about this and not being a part of this. So I think of innovative projects, creative projects. What can we do out of this club? Outside of course, supporting many good organizations, including Cornerstone, to do small things that bring supports to victims, because we are working on the victim side ourselves. We work with those youth and adults, parents who've been exploited, harmed, hurt, But what can we do that might have, this is just, top of the head, things that would go to the part of that equation that changes our social norms. We do a lot of also work with kids in schools. We do a lot of school-based education in our Bloomington schools, even Prairie schools across 10 cities in Hennepin County, just talking with young boys and girls, and it's really inspiring to see young boys who are getting together and talking about, we're not going to do this. What are we going to do about changing ourselves and our own culture to make a difference? So I'm on my bandwagon now. And you're standing up to say we need to end. But I would encourage us all, if anyone wants to become a part of the Men's Council, I would love that. Or just learn more about how we're engaging in the community. Would love folks to come and visit our agency and talk. Yeah.
Meg, something I'm not clear on. You mentioned schools and classes, but is there a organized curriculum that's taught or presented locally to all of our schools and children so that they're aware of this?
Well, Cornerstone is in 10 cities, and we have a very streamlined, organized curriculum. But the problem in our schools is a little bit that it's piecemeal. It's generally not a school taking on, we want all of our kids to get this. It's usually through our health classes, depending upon the teacher who wants you there. I think there's some schools that are more actively engaged in bringing curriculum and content into their school. And actually even Prairie and Bloomington are two of those very strong schools that we've been a part of, but it's inconsistent. I'd love to see legislation that really sort of moves some of that forward in a more significant way so that all of our kids are going to get information around some of these issues consistently, but it's pretty piecemeal right now.
Lots of great information. If you have additional questions, Meg would be happy to be our club representative for human trafficking in the district. Thank you.